Western Europe has been a parasite of the world for about 5 centuries. You're a European, you might be very offended, but it's true. Now, don't get me wrong, because of this parasitism, Western Europe was able to propel the world to a level of advancement that would have seemed mythical even 200 years ago. The technology that was produced over the past 500 years has minimized infant mortality, famine, a whole bunch of other societal ills that would have killed most of us before we turned 35. But since the end of World War II, Europe was not the world center of innovation. That shifted over to America. It was at that time that Europe was no longer able to exploit the world the way they have been for the previous 4 centuries. So instead of a lot of these countries becoming independent and more self-sufficient, they just exported a lot of their energy needs to either the United States, the Middle East, or Russia. And even before the fall of communism in Russia, they were relying heavily on America's nuclear overall umbrella for military defense. So Western Europe just chose different organisms to leech off of. That's it. Now, don't get me wrong. England is the reason why the Industrial Revolution actually took place. So more than any other country, they capitalized fully off of the parasitism that they employed over half of the world. I wouldn't include Germany into Western Europe. I would consider them more Central Europe, but if you want to include them, I'll say this. Nobody can dismiss what Germany did in World War I and especially World War II. Up until that point, they had one of the smallest colonial footprints, even though they had such high industrial production. Germany's economic and industrial production was primarily self-made. They didn't rely on the blood, sweat, and tears of millions of suppressed people all around the world, the way England, France, and Spain did. Don't forget the Netherlands. Aside from the UK and Germany, I don't know if Western Europe can actually stop sucking off of some teat from somewhere. Now, all that being said, I still think that NATO is an absolute necessity for world peace. And the United States is much better off with strong alliances and trade relationships with Europe. That's common sense. I don't think NATO is going away or that the US is stepping out. The Secretary General said he's absolutely confident about the US's commitment to NATO's Article 5. And when our current president was asked on March 13th whether US forces would defend an ally which came under attack from Russia, he said, "We will make sure it doesn't happen." He also said, you have to keep NATO strong, you have to keep it relevant. That doesn't sound like the rhetoric of somebody who wants to pull out of the alliance, at least not to me. But Western Europe has been living in this fantasy la-la land for far too long, and they need to be snapped out of it. When Russia invaded Ukraine the first time in 2014, Europe did next to nothing in retaliation. They still heavily traded with Russia and relied on them for their primary energy needs. And even to this day, Western Europe is still heavily trading with Russia by exporting their goods to former Soviet states, and then those goods are transported into their motherland. Robin Brooks, who is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute and was a chief economist, has said, the EU allowed Greece to sell 71 ships to Putin's shadow fleet. Every day, more of these sales happen. EU decision-making is broken and zero effort is being made to fix this. The EU is no safe harbor, far from it, because Western Europe has consistently failed to learn from its mistakes. Just think about this. They were terrified about East Asia overpopulating the world over 100 years ago. What does Western Europe do? They get involved in World War I. They kill 20 million of their own people. Then 20 years later, they have World War II. They kill 50 million of their own people. And what do they do after that? They go on birth control. And now they're complaining about their crashing birth rates and their shrinking population. And to make up for the birth deficit, they brought in immigrants from all over the world. And now they're complaining about losing their culture to another population. It's like Western Europe doesn't know how to make a decision without pillaging something from somewhere. Let's look at France. Not only did France completely eviscerate the economy of Haiti once that country gained their full independence, but they are still subjugating almost a dozen African countries, even though officially they've declared their independence. The Brits are still holding on to 14 different territories, but it's nowhere near as oppressive as France. But still, they can't just let it go, can they? And I know everyone wants to thank the Netherlands for getting their act together, but let's not fool ourselves. The Dutch East India Company pillaged Indonesia for 3 centuries, and they still have their fangs deep in that country to get cheap oil and a bunch of other resources. And what about Spain and Portugal? They're not subjugating anyone now. That's true, but I'm mentioning them for the sheer fact that they had control over the entire South American continent. They were able to get whatever resources they want, and they chose to build little to no industry in their home countries. And that's why these are very feeble economic powers on the European continent. Italy I mean, Italy, it's like that friend of yours who used to be really well off, just can't get back on their feet, but they make really good food. Italy lost all of their colonies after World War II, and they've been heavily relying on European help to keep whatever economy they have afloat. Right now, the only country that has more financial exposure than Italy is Greece, and that's not good. Italy owes more money from recovery funds and bailouts than almost Spain and Portugal put together, and it's a shame because Italy has a large economy, they have a lot of great industries, but it just seems like their government can't get anything cohesive together to actually benefit their own people. So even though Italy has such great food and wine, they're still parasitizing off of the rest of Western Europe. And all of these countries keep prolonging this unrealistic behavior because that's just how it's been for them for so long, and that has to change. And I'm aware, as an American citizen, that we have to pay the consequences for our own actions as well. The American people are in for a very rude awakening over these next 4 years, and unfortunately, the entire world is going to feel it. And it's an even greater shame that it took this administration to get Europe to actually start cleaning up its own house, when it should have been done decades ago. I'm the Geo Husar, and I'm not 100% sure that things are going to get worse. Thanks for watching.